Make a marshmallow hand-knit chunky blanket with colors like marshmallow twists. I ordered 7 skeins on TEMU, and they call it thick needle thread, which is just under an inch thick. To get the yarn, you can use my code TAN69060 in my bio link tree. Come check out my video where I do a package reveal and review about the chunky yarn. So you unravel your working yarn and take the end to create a slip knot. This is your starting point. You'll adjust the knot size to be gauged at about 3-finger loop. You'll end up with a tail, a knot, and a loop. Once you've made the slip knot, you'll place it knot side down to create a chain foundation, which is the base and bottom border for your blanket, and where you'll add on knit stitches. Come check out my video explaining the slip knot and chain foundation. So to create even loops for your foundation, make sure your loops have loose holes in the braided chain, which you can gauge with your fingers as you make them. You need them loose as you add on your knit stitches. Make sure you have enough slack in your working yarn. I'd make this on a smooth surface as it helps the yarn slide as you knit. Your chain foundation is done with the open end loop that is the last stitch, and you'll count 24 loops starting at the loop above the knot. Then flip it over. Move your working yarn over to the left. Take your end loop and adjust it a bit smaller, as this will be the bottom right corner. Take your working yarn and pull it through the end loop and up, making sure the loop is about a finger size, and set aside. On the chain, you'll see middle bumps on the yarn, and you'll be pulling your knit stitches through those bumps. Take your right finger and lift that middle bump yarn, and with your left hand hold the working yarn close and pull through, lifting the yarn with your thumb, making a knit stitch, engaging about a finger size loop. You'll continue making your first row of knit stitches, and eventually you'll see the bottom chain border forming. Each row will grow your knit stitches to the length that you want. Also, keep in mind to maintain your side borders straight as you knit. Coming to the end of the first row, make sure you knit stitch that middle bump yarn next to the beginning knot. Arrange your first row, and you'll be able to see the tail, the bottom chain border, and the first row of knit stitches ready to add on more knit stitches. With your tail, knot, knit stitch, and working yarn moved over to the right, you will skip the first loop, which will be the border, and start a knit stitch pulling the working yarn through the back, creating another finger-sized loop, making sure your tension is close to the next loop as you make your next stitch. You'll continue this pattern all the way across the row. At the end of the row, you'll take the end loop, pull the working yarn through and up, moving your working yarn to the left and making another row of knit stitches. It's important to keep your loops consistent as well throughout making the blanket. It helps to maintain the tension evenly. And it also creates a tighter knit, which is what we're trying to go for with this blanket. So do you remember the end loop that you left aside earlier? Well, you'll have to take your working yarn now, pull down and through and up, making a side chain border loop. Again, so making a tighter knit blanket, you'll need to keep the loops smaller, close together, and maintain your yarn tension close as well. Coming to the end loop, pull the working yarn through, down and up, making a side chain border loop. You're ready for the next row of knit stitches and making your side chain border loops to frame your blanket. So you're building up the side chain border with each row that you knit, keeping straight. As you knit, think of your tension and blanket frame, especially on the borders. You can see the frame shaping nicely here. So you'll notice a different pattern is on the back side of your blanket, looking like this. I'll say the yarn is really soft and easy to knit with. Flipping it to the front side, checking my border and side chain, I'm ready to continue knitting the next row. Remember to keep your loops touching and your working yarn tension close as you pull through to create your next knit stitch loop. This first loop next to the border is important to maintain the tension to keeping your blanket straight as well. When you run out of yarn, take another skein and cut flat tops off, expose the center plastic cords, and then light up the cords so it melts the yarn together. Mash the yarn until it cools. Then you can do a stress test to see if it holds. Just as a note, one skein knits around 9 inches worth for this blanket. Now you can continue knitting with no knots in your blanket, and just repeat that process when you run out of yarn. So the border is coming along nicely, so just keep on knitting row by row until you reach to the length that you want. I actually measure to the length I want instead of how many rows I knit. With practice, you'll get the hang of creating consistent loops as you knit. As I'm working, I gently roll the blanket as I knit. It's just easier this way as the blanket gets bulkier. Okay, coming to our last row that we're going to knit, it's going to be at least 2 finger-sized loops, as this will be the top chain border. Okay, so I admit it's taken me a long afternoon to do this blanket, but I'm really excited to see that we're going to finish this before my kids get home, because we know projects stop when kids are around. So it's important to have at least 4 to 5 blanket width strands of yarn left over so that you can cast off your blanket. So you'll be casting off your blanket on the top left. You take your 2 left loops and sandwich them together. Take your working yarn from behind, come to the right and pull through to the left, making a knit stitch large enough to pull over to the next stitch. You'll do this again, making sure to gently pull over, not too tight, so we maintain the squared off border and not a rounded one. Take the last 2 end loops and pull the working yarn down in a knot and then making an end knot and weave it through the chain border so your border looks like this. The top chain border adds a nice finish that really goes well with the bottom chain border. Remember the tail at the bottom? You'll do the same with the beginning tail, so it is knotted, cut off the excess and weave it into the border. I like how this blanket folds, it's really nice. It's also super cushiony and soft. This throw blanket just makes me real happy with its fun vibe and colors. Keep it simple by washing gentle or delicate and air dry flat. Happy hand knitting! Come down my lane at Cobblecreeklane for more DIYs, home decor, and crafts. To help you out, you can order this yarn from my affiliate link and code in my profile on Linktree.